conservatives. He wasn't talking about the Tea Party. He was talking about groups, one of which, and it wasn't Chris's group, sent out a press release condemning the Ryan Murray budget before the Ryan Murray budget was written.
That's actually not true.
Well, it is exactly.
Uninterrupted.
Okay.
Well,
Uninterrupted.
listen, I gave you guys credit, and if it wasn't true, let me just say this. If you're going to interrupt me, if it wasn't true, your press release went to great lengths to say how you had actually read it before you condemned it. So, yes, they came out, FreedomWorks came out ahead of time and said Ryan Murray is bad. And again, we're dealing with the vice presidential candidate of the Republican Party. Two, there's another great rhino, Ann Coulter, was on Hannity's program on the 19th of February. And she indicated that while the Tea Party is still a force, she believes there are people who are manipulating the Tea Partiers for their own benefit, tricking Americans into sending them money. And she called these Tea Party folks, or these Tea Party manipulators, shysters and con men. Way back when, I talked to the National Journal and I indicated, and this quote has been taken out of context so many times, I hope I get royalties, that we were going to go into 8 to 10 districts and beat the snot out of them. Now, these same groups have said that I'm referring to Tea Party candidates. That isn't the context. That isn't what I said. I said that I'm tired of these same groups raising millions of dollars and going into districts and wiping out moderate, center-right Republican candidates. And I was and will raise money to defend those people because they fit the districts. And to have somebody come in and Bigfoot a Republican primary was inappropriate. Wasn't an attack on the Tea Party. So, look, and let me just say this, these groups love to engage in a sport called rhino hunting. You'd think they're on a safari all the time. But, when you give the rhino a gun and the rhino has an even shot, well, they're apoplectic. They go nuts. That somehow we're destroying the fabric of the Republican Party. Who anointed these folks to be the spokespeople? Well, they did. And I would argue to you that they don't have the authority, moral or otherwise, based upon things that they have passed judgment on during their careers. And I'm not going to take issue with Chris because as I examined Chris's voting record in the United States Congress, it looks just like mine. But I'm a rhino. And they are now criticizing Republican incumbents for doing things that Chris and I both voted for. Raising the debt ceiling, earmarks. We both voted for the bridge to nowhere. Disaster aid for Rita and Katrina, but denying it for Superstorm Sandy. Chinese currency, minimum wage. But my favorite, I think, is the Export-Import Bank. Now, Club for Growth and its brethren condemned Republican members who voted to reauthorize the Export-Import Bank. Well, Chris and I both voted to reauthorize it twice. And not only that, Chris's family business received assistance at least 5 times that I can think of.
This is non-germane, sorry.
Well, it is germane because they're calling out Republican incumbents for engaging in behavior that they themselves have engaged in. And, I'm not going to use those words as hypocrisy, but it does seem, it's one of these do as I say, not as I do. And I think it's appropriate.
Can I respond?
Well, you're going to get a minute. I'm almost done.
Well,
Listen,
but
I tell you, I'm
if
almost
I take
finished.
up, let me just, I don't want to be, but if you take up your whole opening statement talking about me.
I'm not talking about you.
No, we're going to let him finish, and then you're going to get to respond.
So if I get time to talk about me and give my opening
you,
statement?
I would have been specific about you. I said you and I voted the same. But the difference between us is you have the temerity to attack our former colleagues for taking those same positions. But let me get to what really bothers me. Get past Chicola, get past the Club for Growth, get past the hypocrisy. In 2006, the Republican Main Street, my colleagues in the House were busy raising millions of dollars to keep Nancy Pelosi from becoming the Speaker of the House. The Club for Growth in 2006 spent 3 times as much money attacking Republicans as they did attacking Democrats. And I would argue to you, the club isn't responsible. Chris wasn't in charge then. But I'm going to tell you something. Obamacare doesn't happen. The carbon tax doesn't happen. The $864 billion stimulus bill doesn't happen. The Wall Street bailout doesn't happen if Nancy Pelosi doesn't have the gavel as the Speaker of the House. Now, fast forward to 2012. Maybe they learned their lesson. Maybe they're team players now. 2012, they did get better. They only spent twice as much against Republicans as they did against Democrats in the 2012 election. So I would tell you, I know what the problem is, and it's not me.
Congressman Chicola.
Okay, great. So where do you start? Thanks for the opportunity to be here, Steve. Good to see you again.
Nice to see you.
I should have said that before you started your comments, but so let me just. So the topic is, who's helping, who's hurting the party, and so we have different perspectives. And let me offer a perspective. My perspective is that the so-called outside groups, the conservative groups, we don't consider ourselves the Tea Party at the Club for Growth, but we're aligned with the Tea Party on economic issues in most cases. I would argue that the outside conservative groups are the rational actors, and the establishment Republicans are the extremists. Now, why would you say that? I would say that because you don't have to be an ideologue. All you have to do is kind of know a little bit about math to say that we are an unsustainable fiscal path. We have debts and deficits that have gotten out of control. Government's too big, too intrusive. Our unfunded liabilities, pick a number, 100 trillion, 80, what is it? You could confiscate the net worth of every single man, woman, and child in this country, and you're 30% short of satisfying our unfunded liabilities. So that's just math, right? And couple that with the fact that every single Republican, probably since at least 2000, that is serving in the Congress, ran on the message, government's too big, debt's too big, we have to make sure we reform entitlements, and we have to make sure that we get back to the principles of the Republican Party. So when has that actually happened? And so the point is, the extremists are the ones, the few Republicans serving in the House and the Senate, that actually say, we believe that stuff. We're not going to vote for anything that grows the size of government because government's too big. We're not going to support increasing our debt unless we have reforms that bend the curve. We're not going to vote for budgets that say 10 years will behave better than we are willing to behave today. Those are the extremists. And the rational actors are the ones that say, oh, it's too hard. We can't get off this path. So I would say there's not a civil war in the Republican Congress, or the Republican Party. I would say there's friction in the Republican Party because there are a few members of Congress that have been elected that actually believe in the message that every single Republican ran on. Every single Republican serving today has said the same thing, and there's a few that are putting on the brakes. And when you put on the brakes to get on a sustainable path, not the road to ruin, you create friction. And when you create friction, people get upset. But it's a lot better than cruising smoothly down the road to fiscal ruin that everyone that can do the math says we're on. And so I think the friction is going to save us, not destroy us. And the question I would ask anyone that wants to criticize these so-called extremists that simply do what Republicans say they're for is, and you can offer it tonight if you know it, name one thing the Club for Growth, Tea Party, Ted Cruz, kind of the target of the day, believes in and advocates that's not in the Republican platform. Nothing. Everything that we advocate is in the Republican platform, and every Republican says they're for. Now, we say we can't do it because it's too hard, because we got to get the power back. Well, we'll talk more about the power of the majority and how Republicans behave in the majority, but let me just talk about me for a second. I had a 93% lifetime score with the Club for Growth. Steve Lautrette has a 45. We didn't vote the same. In fact, we voted very differently. But I voted for some things that it took me a while to figure out. So I was a business guy. I get to Washington. I'm going to be part of the team. I'm going to be a problem solver. This is going to be great. I had a life-changing experience, and I'll share that with you. So in 2004, George W. Bush gets reelected. The day after the election, he goes in front of the American people and he says, we're going to fix Social Security. I'm going to use my political capital to provide leadership for the thing we all say we're for, every Republican. By then, the Democrats had spent $10 million saying I wanted to steal everybody's Social Security. AARP had run ads tearing the house down to fix the sink and all that stuff. I called Karl Rove and I said, hey, why don't you come to my district and we'll do a town hall meeting with the president. He said, sure. 8,000 people, screaming fans in the Notre Dame basketball arena. President Bush comes out, he does a great job, says how we're going to change Social Security. By the way, Social Security has about 4 moving parts. Medicare has about 1,000 moving parts. It's actually fixable. I go back, I'm on Ways and Means, I go back to the chairman and I say, Chairman, this was great. We had 8,000 people. Let's do this. He says, I'm in production, not sales. Go talk to leadership. Okay, I go talk to leadership, say, I'm in a vulnerable district. I've never missed a vulnerable meeting, a members meeting. Let's do this. They look at me and they say, what are you, crazy? We're not doing that. We could lose our majority if we did that. I said, well, I guess I'm naive. I ran on that. Didn't you run on that? Didn't we all run on that? You got a president that can provide leadership and cover for us to do that? No, we're not going to do that. It's too hard. Might risk our majority. What happened in 2006? We all got slaughtered. So that changed my life. What good is a majority if you're not going to use it? What good is it being part of the team if the team is the problem? So when a Republican is going to stand up and actually just do what they say they believe, that's all we ask. There's not one thing in our material, not one thing that we advocate that's not in the Republican platform. We're not the radicals. We're the rational actors. Those that say, misrepresent to the voters, vote for me, I'll do this, they never do it. I would argue that they're the extremists.
Thank you. I want to ask something you referred to about the Bush era. Was that, you had the Republicans win Congress and win a majority 3 elections in a row. You had a Republican president get reelected with a bigger margin than he had originally gotten elected in. And then after the Bush era, we've had Democrats win most of the elections. Was the Bush era good for Republicans, and was it good for the right? This is going to be for both of you. First to Congressman Chicola.
Well, I would argue that the only reason we have Barack Obama and the only reason we have Obamacare is because of the Republicans from 2000 to 2006. We created the environment where that could happen. We created the environment where Barack Obama could win and Obamacare could win. And by the way, the mainstream partnership supported Arlen Specter against Pat Toomey. Who cast the deciding vote in Obamacare? Arlen Specter, a former Republican. And by the way, every Republican that we've ever opposed, except one that we beat, became a Democrat or has donated to Democrats. Bob Bennett's the only one that has not done that. So I would argue that Republicans in the era that Steve and I served together betrayed the Republican brand so much that people rejected it and said, we'll try something else. And it was Barack Obama which created the opportunity to have Obamacare. And so I don't think it was good for the Republicans, unfortunately, and we're still living with the consequences of it today.
Congressman LaTourette.
Well, I'm still stunned that I have a 45% with the Club for Growth. I thought it was in single digits, so I appreciate that. But let me say this. We're going to agree on this one, because when President Bush became the president and we controlled all 3 levels of Congress, we stopped operating as an equal branch of the government. And we abdicated our legislative responsibilities to the White House. And the evidence of that is that President Bush, I don't know if you were there then or not, but President Bush's first veto was in his 7th year. And it was a water resources bill. 7 years. And the president would come to Capitol Hill, and even though the Afghanistan war was in its 5th, 6th, 7th year, they kept coming back and asking for emergency spending. Now, emergency spending is when you have an emergency and you can't plan for it. Well, we were at war, and we'd been at war for 5 or 6 years. It should have been done in regular order, and we gave that up. So I don't disagree with you, but the difference is I'm not going to quit the team. I'm a lifelong Republican. I believe in the Republican Party, and I want the Republicans to elect the next president of the United States.
The next thing I wanted to ask about was the government shutdown we just had. You had, I think, referred to that when you said over the last 4 or 5 months what's been going on. How do you think that played as far as its effects on the Republican Party and conservative hopes and causes?
Well, the only good thing about the government shutdown is that Obamacare is less popular than the government shutdown. So, but you embarked on a strategy that the speaker said was stupid. It was not winnable. And I don't think it was your group, Chris, but one of the groups got up the day before the government reopened and said, we knew this wasn't going to work. And, you know, there's more to going in and voting no and saying, I'm not going to vote for this, I'm not going to vote for that. Anybody that believed that because of Senator Cruz's filibuster on the Senate floor, that Barack Obama down at the White House was going to go, you're right, that Obamacare sucks. Let's just get rid of it. It was a non-winning strategy. And just like the fiscal cliff, every time John Boehner said, what if we get this? What if we get the medical device tax? What if we get the Keystone Pipeline? What if we get this? This group that Chris is talking about said no. Now, you want to waste the majority There's no point in being in the majority if you can't deliver 218 votes. There was no point to the government shutdown because it was never, ever going to be successful to repeal Obamacare. And I would say again, if some of these groups had worked with concert with us in 2006 and 2012, you wouldn't have Obamacare because Nancy Pelosi wouldn't have been the Speaker of the House.
Well, you don't get anywhere by accident, right? So a lot of things happen to the moment we're talking about where the government shut down. So, you know, the perplexing thing I always ask is, you know, it's not a surprise that we're going to have CRs. It's not a surprise that we're going to have debt limit votes. In fact, we know long in advance that this is going to happen. And so it seems that, you know, leadership would get together and say, we're not unreasonable. We don't want to shut the government down. We don't want to breach the debt limit. We just want responsible behavior because we're on this unsustainable path that everyone agrees who can do math says we're on. So let's just behave better, and this is what better behavior looks like. And describe something that they want that puts us on a more sustainable path, and rather than say, you know, we're going to shut the government down. And for 6 months before the vote, every Republican that goes on any show or talks to any reporter, and they say, so how's the weather in Cleveland, Ohio today? He said, well, we're not unreasonable. We don't want to shut the government down. We just want to put us on our country on a better path, and better behavior looks like this. If every Republican did that for 6 months, and by the way, 70% of Americans actually agree. There's too much debt, there's too much deficit, we need to get on a better path. Instead, we wait until the last second, we blame Ted Cruz, and before that we say, let's not fight, and if we try, blame us. And so now we're saying, well, it was still really stupid, we were still really dumb, and everybody hates Obamacare. Maybe we should say, you know, we had a point. Everybody hates Obamacare, we were trying to point that out, and now people understand. We were willing to take extreme measures to protect you from this awful thing. I had my insurance canceled. So my favorite person, now the person I respect the most in Washington, may surprise you, is Nancy Pelosi. The reason I respect Nancy Pelosi is because she had a historic job. I mean, she was the first woman Speaker of the United States House of Representatives. And she woke up for 40 years saying, I want to pass nationalized health care. And she got the job that she could get it done. And during the process, she realized the polls nationally, public opinion polls, never get close to 50% approval. She had really, you know, people that opposed, like Bart Stupak in her conference, that were very opposed to it. But she got it done, and she knew it would jeopardize her historic job. She could lose her job over doing what she believes. But she found a way to do it because she believed in it so strongly, and it's the law today. So is there a Republican you can think of that is willing to risk their job to do what they think is right? Is there a policy that they're willing to fight on? So I had a senator call me and say, you can't be for defund. Can't be for that. I said, great. Tell us what we're for. What's leadership saying we should be for? I don't know. I said, great. We'll be for defund until somebody offers something else. Nobody ever offered anything else. So if you don't like the tactic of Ted Cruz going to the floor and doing a filibuster, what's yours? What's your tactic besides surrender? So is it better to fight, make a point, and lose, or just surrender, making no point?
Could we have a conversation on this for a second?
Please do.
Moving from the Obamacare and the government shutdown, and I would argue we lost 16 days of news cycle on the horrible rollout of the Affordable Care Act. But if you go to the fiscal cliff, which was my sort of last hurrah in the United States Congress, so if you remember, the Bush tax cuts of 2001 and 2003 were set to expire on January. That was part of the fiscal cliff. And Mitch McConnell made, in my opinion, a very bad deal. The president had been reelected. He was running around the country saying rich people make $250,000 or more as a couple, and we got to let their taxes go up and let those tax cuts expire that both you and I voted for and supported in 2001 and 2003. See, I can be nice when I want to be. But then, so Mitch McConnell makes this deal that says rich isn't $250, it's $450. Well, I thought that was a horrible deal. And so Boehner again comes up with the famous Plan B. Plan B isn't something he wanted, but he said, let's set the definition at $1 million so that we can then go and negotiate with the president and Harry Reid. Your group and other groups sent out these, we're going to score this thing, blah, 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 blah. And you can do that. And you can stand up and you can fight. But at the end of the day, when you scuttle Plan B, just like the government shutdown, what are the choices? The choices that you left the Republican Party in the House was to either vote for something that you were going to whack them on your scorecard, the bad McConnell-Reed deal, or to vote it down, and then what was going to happen on January the 1st? And who was going to be happy tweeting? Barack Obama. Because taxes would have gone up on every American in the country. You got no exit strategy. You got no plan C. And that is what drives me crazy.
Well, the charade of it, the Plan B was never going to become law because, as you just said, Harry Reid never would have taken it up in the Senate. So it was a charade. It was putting Republicans on record before the previous law expired, raising taxes. Now, my argument was they should be mad at us for passing the 2003 tax cuts with a 10-year window. Well, how come there's always temporary?
Mad at you for that.
Were you mad?
Yes.
Thank you. Thank you. So
I'm mad at you now.
I'm actually to blame for part of that because, there's always temporary tax cuts and there's never temporary spending. So just budgetary windows are a bad way to run the country. So the stage was set a long time ago, but it was never going to become law. Just like the Farm Bill, where we're going to split it up. Who thought that was ever going to happen? I mean, the only reason this Farm Bill and the food stamps were split up is to get it to conference. Did anybody think it was not going to be remarried in conference? So we got criticized for being against the Farm Bill after they split it up. Well, it's a charade. We're not in the business of supporting charades. And that's part of the problem with Republicans is they don't realize voters are kind of smart. They know this is a charade. And now we got this Farm Bill that was remarried, and it's awful policy. But that's another topic probably.
Well, but that, on the sort of negotiation, one of the criticisms of a group like Club for Growth or Heritage Action or some of the members aligned with them is that they confuse difference in tactics for shortness of principle. That the John Boehner, I guess the shortest way to say it is John Boehner wants the most conservative outcome possible, and he has a path, and when he does that, Club for Growth and Heritage Action and Freedom Works come out and say they're going to score against it, and they take away the ability of the Republican leader to steer us through an indirect path towards an imperfect but conservative outcome. That's a criticism I've heard. What's your response?
Well, give me the example that's a conservative outcome. I mean, Jim DeMint says he's never seen a bipartisan bill to shrink the size of government. I think he's probably right. And so it's, we want Congress to do stuff. Well, what stuff do we want them to do? And so Republicans have run on reforming entitlements. Give me one entitlement reform, just one. Republicans have said we're going to reduce the debt and the deficit. Give me, when have we reduced the debt? The deficit, the day I left Congress, it was January 3rd of 2007, the deficit was $168 billion, and the debt was under $5 trillion. Too big, but minuscule compared to today. And so what's happened between then and now is it just gets bigger. So where's the conservative option? If the word compromise is kind of silly, because it doesn't matter until you decide where you're starting from. If you're starting on how much we're going to grow government, don't compromise. If you're starting on how much do we shrink government, compromise all day long. If you're moving in the right direction, compromise all day long. But if you're moving in the right direction, say no.
So, well, let me just say this. One of the reasons that the debt and the deficit were as low as they were when you got there is because I and Newt Gingrich and John Kasich and a lot of others had the courage to do the Balanced Budget Act of 1997. But that's a great example, because in our democratic form of government, the way the framers set it up, you wouldn't have had the Balanced Budget Act of 1997 if you don't get President Clinton's signature. You don't get President Clinton's signature by shutting down the government and doing all kinds of goofy things.
He did.
You negotiate. And so the difficulty that I have with the tactics that some of these folks engage in, if they don't get 100%, they're not willing to move. And that's what it's about. And in this democracy, the voters for the last many, many years have decided they want the split form of government, so one party can keep an eye on the other. The only way you can affect change, and it's not accurate to say we haven't proposed entitlement reform on the Republican side, the Democrats won't vote for it, and the president won't sign it. And so what are you going to do about that? What are you going to do about that? You have to find the things that are doable without violating your conscience and your principles and get it done. And this notion that you're going to vote no always to appease your scorecard or Freedom Works scorecard, that may resonate in front of certain audiences, but it isn't governing the country.
Well, we did have everything from 2000 to 2006, and we did nothing. That's my point, is that the old Republican majority, I don't think is going to be, I mean, I'm not sure a new Republican majority is going to be any better than the old Republican majority. I don't see any signs that we've learned our lessons. I learned some lessons. My life changed. I was part of the problem when I was there, but I saw, and at the end, before I got really smart, I got beat. So I retired for health reasons. My constituents got sick of me. So we did there. We had the opportunity. The Social Security, clearly Bush tried to lead that effort, and we decided not to. And I mean, and we give back victories. The sequester, all we had to do was nothing to keep that. I mean, we actually won. And the military pension reforms, all we had to do was nothing. They'd already voted for it. And anyone's in competitive race thinks voting to undo it is going to save you if you think that's a bad thing. And the military pension thing, it's hard because it's tough politics, but it's necessary to do these things. The flood insurance, there was real reforms that were bipartisan in the Biggert Waters bill, and now we can't do that. And by the way, we can't do that while we're in the minority. Why can't you just blame the Democrats? If the majority is so important and you do this thing that you think is so bad, blame the Democrats for it. So if you're afraid of it when you're in the minority, I shudder to think how fearful you'll be in the majority.
Let me put a finer point on that and throw it back to you. You say you're talking sort of about pragmatism and lining up to win elections, but if I'm a conservative and I look at the Bush era, which you agree was flawed from a conservative perspective, and some of these other problems, either the Republican House, you say, why do I have confidence that a Republican majority just in and of itself is going to deliver me the conservative outcomes?
Well, two things. Just as Chris has had a Damascus Road conversion, I don't think the folks that would run the show in the future are the same folks that ran it when he and I were there and have the same difficulty. But more than that, and this really is the central point, do you think something gets more conservative with Nancy Pelosi and Harry Reid writing the bill? The answer is no. It can't get more conservative. And so if you think, and Senator DeMint one time said something that made my head spin, that he'd rather serve in a permanent, pure minority. Well, that may be okay for a monastery, but it's not okay. It's not okay if you ever want to set policy. If you have that view that you never, unless we have a pure candidate for president, we don't want the White House. That's ridiculous.
And so then this brings me to, we've talked about Capitol Hill. Let's talk about races here.
Can I just say one thing in the Senate? We're all for Republican. What's the difference between ACT and ringing caucus?
Are these groups that raise millions of dollars to have a disproportionate impact on the result of that race? Ronald Reagan would not get a 45 on your scorecard. And I think that really is the point. And talking about, just for a second, there's been a big dust-up in the fact that we've accepted contributions from labor unions. Well, look, the day Ronald Reagan was shot, he was leaving the Washington Hilton, having given a speech to the building trades. And apparently John Hinckley didn't like it because he endorsed the federal prevailing wage law. And oh, by the way, President Reagan was a union president on top of that. And part of our problem is, if we're going to be so pure, our coalition is made up of angry white guys and a few angry white women. We don't win African Americans. We don't win Asian Americans. We don't win Hispanics. We don't win labor households. How can you elect the president of the United States?
All right, so I want to quickly move. You remember the Jeopardy episode of Cheers, where he answers, "Who are three people who have never been in my kitchen?" Sharon Angle, Ken Buck, Richard Murdoch, who are three people who are not in the U.S. Senate right now. These were races that were winnable in Nevada, Colorado, Indiana. We can name other states, and you sometimes do, but I'm just going to point to those three because they got broad, sort of, you could call it Tea Party support. I don't think you guys endorsed Angle, or maybe you did. So in those three cases, the argument that, to me as a political reporter, has some resonance is the establishment candidate in those cases, certainly Richard Lugar in Indiana, would have had a better chance of winning. So are you hurting the party? There could be a Republican majority if the establishment always got to nominate its guy for the Senate.
I'm so glad you asked. So we did endorse Sharon Angle in a primary. We did endorse Richard Lugar in a primary. We did not endorse Ken Buck in a primary. We did in the general after he became the party nominee. We supported him. We can take each of those races. So in the history of the Club for Growth, there's been 2 candidates in the history of the club. It's since 1999 at least. There's been 2 candidates that have won competitive Republican primaries, so they became the party nominee, that didn't become members of Congress. 2. And so there's this fallacy of the club that we support these unelectable right-wing nuts. There's 2 that have ever lost. Now, in full disclosure, 2 of them took 2 tries. Andy Harris in Maryland and David Schweiker in Arizona. Both took 2 tries. They both lost in 2008, but they came back. We supported them again and lost and won in 2010. Richard Murdoch and Dick Lugar, everyone forgets that Dick Lugar lost the primary by over 21 points. So the Club for Growth just recognized reality. I know Lugar's folks. I said in the summer of 2011, the greatest service you could do to the senator is convince him to retire. He's going to lose. He decided not to. He lost by 21 point something points. Then he proceeded to never help Richard Murdoch, never once. Didn't say one nice thing about him, didn't help him raise money, didn't do anything. But, and Richard Murdoch, anybody that met him in Washington would have said, I'm surprised how good a candidate he is. He was not someone that talked about social issues on a regular basis. His signature issue was economic. It was opposing the auto bailout with TARP funds. But he made an inexcusable mistake. He did. He went to a debate. If he'd just gotten a flat tire, he'd be a senator today. But he made an inexcusable mistake in the environment that was created by Todd Aiken. We didn't endorse Todd Aiken.
Do you think that he was a worse or a better Senate candidate than Richard Lugar in the general election? Would Lugar have had a better chance of winning?
Probably, yeah. Probably.
So does this sort of, to use a loaded term, purity test, does that cost Republicans and thus conservatives?
Richard, well, but the point is, like I said, the thing I really am always impressed with is how people recognize how powerful and influential the Club for Growth is. We're amazing. I mean, we really are.
You are.
We're 11 people on the corner of 20th and Elm. And we get blamed for every miserable thing that happens in the Republican Party. They've got the national committees, they've got the party committees, they've got all their allied outside groups like the chamber and so on and so on. We're 11 people and we can outdo all of them. And I'm always amazed that we can do that. But, so Richard Lugar had spent 40 years distancing himself from his constituents. He didn't own property in the state. He set himself up to fail. He set himself up to become everything wrong with Washington, and he lost. And we saw an alternative. We knew he was going to lose, and we thought we'd help the alternative. So to go in and say, well, we had one bad moment, and that's all the Club for Growth's fault, when, oh, by the way, I got the same conversations when we supported Pat Toomey over Arlen Specter. And oh, by the way, I got the same calls when we supported Marco Rubio over Charlie Crist, and Ted Cruz over David Dewhurst. And you can go down the list over and over. Every time we did something like that, somebody called me and said, you're destroying the Republican Party. These are the only people that can win. Don't you know that? Pat Toomey can't win in Pennsylvania. Marco Rubio can't win in Florida. So would we rather have Arlen Specter? Would we rather have Charlie Crist as the Republicans in the Senate? Or would we rather have Pat Toomey and Marco Rubio?
Congressman LaTourette.
Well, I don't disagree with Chris's record at Club for Growth. I would editorialize about Andy Harris for just a second. Andy Harris was really the first one when I saw your organization come on the map. And who did you take out? Wayne Gilchrist. Wayne Gilchrist was a sergeant in the United States Army that walked the jungles of Vietnam. He was a solid Republican vote. His sin was he liked the environment. And so we had to take Wayne Gilchrist out. And I think that that's a shame, and that really makes the point. And as a result, Andy Harris, who's now in Congress, lost to Frank Credeville, and Frank Credeville became part of the Democratic majority that gave us Obamacare. But, to wash your hands of all of these other folks that have lost these Senate races, I get you didn't do it. But folks that you hang out with did. I never thought I'd live long enough to see a Republican running for the United States Senate begin her commercial with, I am not a witch.
We never,
right?
We never,
I know you did.
We were never
I'm just saying,
yeah.
But you know what? But
the Senate Conservatives Fund did endorse.
And you took out Mike Castle, who's a decent human being. Now, maybe he disagrees on a couple social issues with conservative Republicans, but he was from Delaware, for God's sake. Almost every major corporation is headquartered there. He was on the Financial Services Committee. And so you do pick winners as losers. And I just want to talk about this year's crop, and you can tell me who you're involved in and who you're not. Mitch McConnell, how does the country get better if you prop up the woman, Secretary of State in Kentucky, by taking out the minority leader of the Senate? Thad Cochran in Mississippi. How does the Republican cause get better if you take out Thad Cochran and set him up for defeat? You were going to take a whack. Somebody was going to take a whack at Shelley Moore Capito, who can take a seat in West Virginia. That fizzled. Susan Collins. Enzi, Dick Cheney's daughter was going to save us. How does that strengthen the Senate? And Pat Roberts, where I don't know if you've endorsed the guy running against Pat Roberts, but he's apparently put autopsy photos on the internet and is talking about how funny it is that these people have been shot, killed, and mangled. Now, maybe he should have gotten a flat tire, and if you were doing your job, you should have punctured all four of them.
So setting aside the autopsies and the tires, I want to try to focus that question towards you a little bit better. Would conservatives be better off without Thad Cochran? Are they better off with Chris Coons instead of Mike Castle?
Well, the only race that you were involved in that you listed there is Mississippi. We're not involved in any of the other races. We have a very disciplined, I would call mature, process that we go through to vet candidates and look at all the dynamics in the race. But so we weren't involved with the defeat of Mike Castle. But
So why are you going after Thad Cochran?
Well, Thad Cochran's, he's a lot like Dick Lugar in the sense that he's been there for over 40 years, and I don't care how great none of this has to do with how great of people they are. They're all great people. It has nothing to do with personality. It has everything to do with voting record and who's going to fight. And so so this is the thing I never figure out is how, if you've been there for 40 years, you run a campaign saying, elect me to fix the problem I created. We got too much debt, we got too much government, we got too intrusiveness, and we think the guy that's been there for 40 years is going to fix it. And we never support anybody unless we have a better alternative to offer. Chris McDaniel in Mississippi is an extraordinary candidate. He is very impressive. He's a state senator, and he is a much better alternative to Thad Cochran in our view. So we're supporting him. Nothing to do that Thad Cochran's a bad guy. He's been there 40 years, and we've got all these problems, and we don't think that a guy that's been there 40 years is going to fix them. So that's the only race. So Mike Castle lost. Why did Matt Castle lose? And Christine O'Donnell was not a good candidate. We didn't support her. We never were tempted to. But the environment was created by Republicans that let that happen. And so Republicans always ask themselves the wrong questions. It's, so these meanies took out Mike Castle. No, why? Why did somebody like Christine O'Donnell, why was she able to beat him? What was the environment? What led up to it? That's the question I think Republicans have to ask.
Do you think Republicans in the Bush era, or do you think Republicans bear blame for rallying up the base in such a way that a witch could be nominated for Senate?
No, I actually lay it at the feet of the millions of dollars. I go back to these groups, and it's not Chris's group. The millions of dollars that are spent by a few millionaires funding these organizations that Bigfoot the primary. Mike Castle could not raise the revenue necessary to fight the primary. And so you do one of two things. You either nominate these Manchurian candidates who lose in November, or or you so weaken the incumbent that they lose in the general election. I do want to just tell one story that has nothing, but so speaking of 40 years, so I'm in office for 3 terms. I give this really passionate speech as to why I should be reelected. A place called Ashtabula, Ohio. Guy comes up to me and said, I really liked what you had to say. I can't stand the guy that's in there now, and I'm going to vote for you.
So I want to remind you again, we've got a couple questions, but I'm going to ask one more, and I want you guys to throw questions at me through Twitter. Just use the hashtag AEI debates. We've got about 10 minutes left, but what I want to put to you, Congressman LaTourette, is the point about the sort of rhinos not coming to help, so to speak. After you get Lugar not helping, Gilchrist, or even when it's not incumbents losing. And this is a governor race, but I remember New Jersey in 2001 when Brett, what was his name? Schundler won that primary and the Republican Party didn't rally behind him. It's not across the board. We did see Mitch McConnell wanted Trey Grayson to be the nominee in Kentucky. When Rand Paul beat Trey Grayson, McConnell got behind him. But that stuck out as an exception. And the feeling on the base is when the base wins, then the leadership walks away while the base is supposed to rally behind the leaders.
You know what, I really think that that's a great point, and I don't know that I recognized that till about 2 months ago when I'm talking to the head of the Liberty Council in Ohio, and he makes that point. And he's right. I mean, you can't compete in primaries and say that you want to elect Republicans, and when your Republican doesn't win, you're not there. And I agree with that 100%. And so I'll say in front of all of you, as God is my witness, no matter what primaries we go into, whoever wins, we're going to support the Republican in the fall because that's the right thing to do. And I would expect it that would flow both ways.
One question here is the Bill Buckley rule. Republicans ought to nominate the most electable conservative. The most conservative candidate who's electable is what he would say. Do you both subscribe to that? Would you tweak that rule in one way or another? Maybe we just have different interpretations of that same rule.
Well, listen, I think that that's what I've been talking about for the last hour and a half. And, you know, so Ted Cruz is a fine senator for the state of Texas. Ted Cruz could not win in New Hampshire. Ted Cruz could not be elected senator in the state of Ohio or in the Northeast. And so, you know, not everybody, people think that Republicans are like peanut butter, that we're homogenized and we're all the same. There are differences between Republicans in different regions of the country. The Nixon Solid South strategy created a different dynamic within the Republican Party where Southern Republicans think a little bit differently than Northern Republicans. And I think the goal of the party infrastructure and the groups that align themselves with the party should be to find that person who can win the general election. And if you don't do that, then you're really just wasting everybody's time.
Well, that's actually not the Buckley rule. I mean, the Buckley rule has been perverted. The Buckley rule was the most viable, the most rightward viable candidate. And Bill Buckley ran for mayor of New York, never thinking he could win, but he thought he was viable in the fact that he could deliver the conservative message. So the guy that was there in the room when it was formulated has taken issue with the perversion of the Buckley rule to people's individual viewpoints. But, you know, so Ted Cruz is from Texas. Yeah, he is. But Pat Toomey's from Pennsylvania. And they kind of believe the same stuff. They have different styles. But Pat Toomey's written books about free trade, entitlement reform, pro-growth tax policy, and he wins in Pennsylvania. So I think that it's a bit of a cop-out to say that we have to compromise principles. We can't talk about the things that conservatives believe because they're from the Northeast or they're from a purple state. When you have people like Pat Toomey winning in Pennsylvania, Jeff Flake winning in Arizona, Ted Cruz winning in Texas, if you have a candidate that can clearly, articulately, in appealing fashion, stand up and say, I believe that free market principles have done more for the human soul. Read Arthur Brooks' book about the battle. Has done more for the human soul than any other economic model, and I think supporting these principles leads to prosperity and a better life and a higher standard of living for everyone. And when someone says you want to change Medicare, you say, you're damn right I want to change Medicare because it's broke, unsustainable, and we owe it to future generations to do the right thing.
So I want to focus that for a question to you. Can conservative candidates to the right of their state or district, can they lead their people with them, or do they have to sort of match themselves to the district, which is some of what when you talk about Susan Collins, you're saying we need somebody who matches the state.
A couple of things. First of all, Pat Toomey did win in Pennsylvania, but he voted for the Ryan Murray budget, and he voted to provide some gun control during that whole discussion. So, and I would say that that was reflective of what some of the people in his district want. The title in the House is you're a representative. You're not some ideologue that is a juggernaut sent to Washington to do whatever the hell you feel like doing. You are supposed to represent the views of your party, and the expression in the House, at least, is you get to represent them as long as you represent them. And the minute you stop representing them, they're going to find somebody new to represent them. And I'm going to tell you right now, and go back to the labor issue. I had 70,000 labor union households in my district. My sister is a teacher and a member of the National Education Association. I don't think that those folks need to be my enemy. But now in Georgia or North Carolina, maybe it doesn't work so good. But you can't take a one-size-fits-all to every district in the country and say, we're going to run 435 Ted Cruzes and damn the torpedoes. You can, but you're going to wind up with that pure, permanent minority that Senator Mint once opined about.
I want to ask a quick question about, you talked about the outside groups, the money, about the role that money plays. So it'll be sort of one for each side of you. One of the criticisms of these outside groups is that they profit from sowing dissent, that if you say, oh, well, we're going to go along with Boehner here, that it makes it harder to raise money. The flip side for you, I'm going to let Congressman Chicola answer first, is the business lobby is not always a conservative lobby. Even if you moving beyond the Export-Import Bank, lots of other issues. The stimulus is an obvious case where the Chamber of Commerce was on the liberal side. So does the business lobby corrupt the leadership and the establishment, and does the need to drive a wedge between the base and the establishment end up corrupting some of the outside groups?
So are we going to get our wrap-up comments?
Yeah, so
after
this and then the wrap-up.
Okay, which I didn't want to do, but now I do.
Yeah.
There's this charge that, we agitate things to raise money. Let me let you know a little secret. We are a fundraising organization, as is the NRCC, the NRSC, the RNC, every group around here. AEI is a fundraising. We don't do anything with the purpose of raising money, but there is a lesson somewhere, I think, in the fact that when we put out two we're really getting squishy. We put out 2 press releases in the last week complimenting Republican committee chairs, because they're doing good stuff. Dave Camp being one of them with his tax reform. So if we put out things from time to time that oppose what Republican leadership wants to do, and our 100,000 members, who are primarily Republicans, send us money to stop them from doing it, there's a lesson in there somewhere. And so this charge of we do stuff to raise money, well, to show me a group that doesn't raise money. We do raise money to advocate our mission and to advance our mission, but we don't do it just to make things miserable. I always say at the club, we can do things that make people uncomfortable, could tick people off. That's okay. But if we ever surprise anyone, that's not okay. We're very consistent in the application of our mission, and if we're not, that's our fault, not anybody else's. So anything we do shouldn't be a surprise to anybody.
I want you to address the
chamber, sure. The chamber's not pure. I mean, the chamber is interested in business, and historically, most Republicans are interested in business and economic growth. And so there are many times when the interests intersect. There are times when they diverge. And, we're not a rubber stamp for the chamber, nor do we endorse all of their policies. And likewise, they don't do ours as well. But I don't think Chris and his group run around trying to raise money off of misery. I do think that there is the least common denominator out there. There's a lot of anger in America. And there's no doubt if you can tap into that anger, rightly or wrongly, that people are going to send you checks.
All right. Final comments, I guess, since you got the opening question first, you can get your final comments first.
Great. I appreciate this very much. And Chris, it's nice to see you again. Thank all of you for being here. And I think this thing can stop tonight. And Chris, I would say, let's stop it tonight. I will turn back every penny, every farthing that I have raised at the Republican Main Street Partnership to those people that want to invest in our program to defend Republican incumbents. If you stop attacking Republican incumbents, get out of Idaho, get out of Mississippi, get out of all the other places that you are, and you have my promise in front of all these people and God that I will give every penny back and not spend a dime. And if you spend as much money attacking Democrats as you do attacking Republicans, maybe we can have a Republican Senate, and maybe we can have a Republican President of the United States. Thank you very much.
Congressman.
Well, thanks. I don't want to be rude, Steve, but I decline your offer. I appreciate it.
Alert the media.
And the reason I decline the offer is because I think Republicans ask themselves the wrong question all the time. So we sat here and talk about Richard Murdoch and Todd Akin. Who cares about Richard Murdoch and Todd Akin?
North Dakota.
Romney won by double digits, and they both got slaughtered. Why? That's the question that we should all be asking. Why did all these establishment candidates lose races that we could win? Don't blame the loss of the Republicans' majority in the Senate on Richard Murdoch and Dick Lugar when you had 6 other races that you lost. There were 3 new Republican senators in the Senate. 2 of them were Club for Growth candidates. And so if there is an honest discussion, we'll get off the distraction of Richard Murdoch and Todd Akin, and we'll get to the real crux of the matter. Why did these establishment candidates lose races you could have won? And if we have that debate, we're getting somewhere. We can have an honest debate about how the Republicans can regain control on principle and sustain that majority in a principled fashion.
Thank you, Congressman Chicola. And thank you all for coming. We have, I'm told, wine and cheese out back, so feel free to stick around for that, unless you gave it up for Lent.
Oh, man.
Thank you.
Good to see you.
Thank you.